To the honourable member for Courtenay-Alberni.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I want to thank the Minister. It's been 4 hours, her and her team, for being here tonight. And you as well, Mr. Speaker. Crab harvesters in Area C Tofino, they've been at a continued significant economic loss since the April 1st trap reallocation. The government still has not responded to their request for an independently facilitated negotiation process, a process that is imperative to help speed up the license buyback and properly compensate harvesters for the immediate losses they faced, and will continue to face until enough licenses are bought back. When will the Minister be responding to their requests and meet and set up a negotiation table?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, I understand the difficulties when the crab licenses were allocated due to a court decision to the local First Nations, and due to, I mean, it would be great to just add some licenses, but because of conservation concerns, that's not possible. So we are now working with harvesters and have a budget to negotiate a settlement for that capacity.
Honourable member.
How many licenses she's committed to buying back to ensure that there is no net loss of traps and that the willing buyer, willing seller policy is adhered to?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the member has correctly talked about our willing buyer, willing seller policy, and the volume of traps that was allocated to the First Nations is the volume that we will be buying back, and bids are currently being accepted.
Honourable member.
It's been a year since the Department of Fisheries and Oceans announced the $647 million Pacific Salmon Strategy Initiative. And in that time, there's been really no genuine engagement with First Nations. The Untitled Nations, especially are around, they're saying to me that, to implement the PSSI on the west coast of Vancouver Island, they need to be engaged clearly. And indeed, all the evidence to date points to the PSSI as yet another example of the department directing long-awaited funding toward internal priorities instead of working with First Nations to decide how best to allocate limited resources. Will the Minister direct her staff to immediately reach out to the Nuu-chah-nulth nations to establish a process for a jointly managed implementation of the PSSI on the west coast of Vancouver Island?
The Honourable member.
Well, thank you for that question, Mr. Speaker. One of the key pillars of the PSSI is collaboration. So it's on the one hand, we're being told we are not moving quickly enough, but on the other hand, we're very committed to collaborating with Indigenous communities and others, and that work is ongoing.
The Honourable member.
How will the Minister ensure that the PSSI Pacific Salmon Commercial License Retirement Program supports coastal communities and owner-operator fishers, avoids further corporate consolidation of the fishing fleet, and holds industry participants responsible for supporting sustainable harvest transformation?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you for that question. And harvest transformation is one of the key pillars of the Pacific Salmon Initiative. So that means we will be consulting, we'll be working with harvesters, working with industry, and again on a willing buyer, willing seller basis.
Remember.
The installation of intensive subtidal gooey duck aquaculture is proposed for the herring spawning grounds in Lambert Channel, which, according to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans records, are the source of 38% of all the herring spawn that has ever occurred on the BC coast, and which support the whole Strait of Georgia marine ecosystem. Will the Minister put the protection of the spawning habitat of this keystone species ahead of the installation of industrial aquaculture and save it from the inevitable cumulative damage which would follow?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm interested in more details on the specific facility that the member is referring to, but I do want to say that conservation is our bottom line, it's our top priority.
The Honourable member.
Will the Minister commit to taking a whole of ecosystem management-based approach. She's heard me talk about this endlessly because we see harvests of some species impacting other species. Will she gear her department to take a whole of ecosystem management approach, especially with the blue economy?
The Honourable Minister.
That certainly is our approach, and that is something that we will be deepening.
Member.
Does the minister support owner-operator?
Honourable Minister.
Yes, I do.
Member.
Is, if so, I guess is compliance being monitored?
Minister.
Yes, it is.
Member.
Will the minister tell us how many cases are under review then, of those that are in violation?
We'll get a number for the member.
Member.
When will the minister share what information will be public? And you know, she says she'll get that to me. When will she get that to me?
Honourable Minister.
I'll consult with my officials, and we'll give you a time that we can deliver it.
Member.
Does the minister intend to include owner-operator in the blue economy strategy?
Minister.
It will be a very comprehensive strategy, and I would be very surprised if it weren't included.
Member.
That's not a commitment. I'm hoping the minister can commit to that. In terms of reconciliation, how long does the department intend to exclusively continue using the fishery to satisfy their treaty rights?
The Honourable Minister.
I missed the word. How long does...
How long does the minister...
Honourable Member.
How long does the department intend to exclusively continue to use the fisheries to satisfy treaty rights? I've spoken to the minister repeatedly, asking her to ask the Minister of Surna to supply funds for reconciliation, so that reconciliation doesn't fall on the backs of a small group of fishers, and it's shared by all Canadians. Maybe she can speak to that. We've talked about it in relation to the West Coast crab fishers. Maybe she can talk about whether she's had this conversation with the Minister of Surna.
The Honourable Minister.
We do, Mr. Speaker, to the member, we do get dollars for reconciliation. We have a large pot of money in these estimates that are for purchasing the boats, the gear, and the licenses for our willing buyer, willing seller policy.
The Honourable Member.
We haven't seen the numbers in the budget dedicated and committed to that. But we are encouraged to hear that, especially when we're asking for the minister to get to the table immediately with those crab fishers that I outlined. Does the department fully understand the social and economic considerations for all parties when access is being sought?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So that is our process, is consulting with anyone affected so we can understand all of the perspectives when there is an allocation being done.
Honourable Member.
The department intend to continue to expropriate access in areas where there are no expressions of interest through willing buyer, willing seller?
Minister.
Well, thanks for that question. When there are court-ordered rulings providing access to a party who's not already having access, it can be challenged to acquire it, and we...
The Honourable Member.
Okay, has the department worked with Indigenous stakeholders to see if there are any other means by which to satisfy the right?
Honourable Minister.
Willing buyer, willing seller is our approach, and we do have funds to put that into effect.
Member.
Does the department intend to advise non-Indigenous stakeholders of the amount of access being sought in the latest round of negotiations?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm not clear which negotiations the member is referring to.
Member.
Negotiations to the minister. In terms of corporate and foreign ownership, I've been here a lot talking about sharing risks and benefits in the report from FOPO, which we're still waiting for action from the government. Does the minister believe that our harvesters and coastal communities should be the primary beneficiaries of Canadian fisheries?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, firstly, I want to say that with respect to the Fisheries and Oceans report, we have a study of the ownership so that we actually know what the landscape is on the West Coast. And the fisheries benefit the harvesters, their communities, the broader economy. This is a public good resource, and fishers have access to it through licenses and permits.
The honourable member.
Well, I think it's clear in the report they don't want any more transfers of foreign ownership, and they want to know who the beneficial owners are. Does the minister agree that we should have limits on corporate and foreign ownership of our fisheries?
The honourable minister.
I won't be prejudging the outcome of our work to identify what the state of the ownership is on the West Coast at present.
Member.
In the confidence and supply agreement with the NDP, it was outlined that beneficial ownership would be a key priority. Will that apply to fisheries and oceans? End quote.
The honourable member. Honourable minister.
We need to make our decisions based on facts, and that's what we're doing right now, is we're gathering the facts.
Member.
Important, Mr. Speaker, and ensuring that there's a public registry of who actually owns the quota is critical to being able to actually make decisions. And will the minister actually bring back limits on corporate and foreign ownership back to Pacific Fisheries? The limit was 12% from 1960s up until the 1990s.
The honourable minister.
As I mentioned, I won't prejudge the conclusion. We are still in the process of gathering data about ownership.
Member.
Why are super trawlers given access to our exclusive economic zone when small independent owner-operators are shut down? In Pacific, super trawlers had access to our Pacific North Coast in 2021 when almost all of the small boat salmon fleet was shut down. Maybe the minister can explain.
The honourable minister.
Well, thanks for that question, Mr. Speaker. And the ownership structure has evolved over decades here on the West Coast. It's evolved differently than on the East Coast. We are now taking a look at what the data is, who does own what, and we'll be looking at.
The honourable member.
Well, I guess does the minister actually believe super trawlers should be able to process at sea instead of our Pacific exclusive economic zone? There is a current proposal right now to the department to allow this to happen. This would shutter shore processing plants and offer rendering facilities and actually impact communities like Ucluelet in my riding.
Honourable minister.
Well, as I said, we will not be making any changes without first understanding the lay of the land, and we appreciate the Fisheries and Oceans report on this matter.
Well, this is a 2-minute warning. The honourable member.
I was just at French Creek Marina, which you know the minister knows quite well. She travels to Lasqueti Island. They're bursting at capacity. They can't find enough slips for boats. It's impacting our economy, our culture, access to food security. Will the minister meet with marinas like that and look at ways that she can invest in infrastructure to support those working harbors?
The honourable minister.
Well, thank you. And we've spent over $600 million in addition to the annual funding for harbors to do exactly that. I'm not aware that French Creek Harbor has made a request, but that individual case we can look into.
Remember.
Hanjin in Seattle, we've seen the Zim Kingston, we've seen some marine debris spills on our coast. I've talked to the minister about creating the ecosystem service fee on trans cargo shipment units coming into Canada. Has she spoken to the transport minister about creating a fund that can go to coastal and Indigenous communities to have a tactical response plan in place so we can tackle these issues and actually have funding in place and resources ready to go that is timely and immediate?
1-minute warning. The honourable minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I encourage the member to make a representation to the Transport Minister on any regulatory matter or change that he's proposing.
Honourable member.
Mr. Speaker, other industries such as forestry and agriculture have also faced massive upheavals for the same reasons that fisheries are being forced to restructure.
due to climate events and newly developed conservation policies, yet workers and owner-operators in these adjacent resource industries have been heavily supported, both federally and provincially, with funding to withstand the transitions, retain into other vocations, and payouts to bridge to early retirement. Why are commercial fish harvesters being treated inequitably compared to workers in other impacted industries? Like a man in my riding, Lee Sylvie, is a commercial fisher in Parksville, hasn't got any support, Mr. Speaker, and since the government shut 60% of the fisheries on the North Coast. Will the minister speak about bailing out these fishers and supporting them like other sectors?
Allow a 30-second response. The Honourable
Well, I
Minister.
do understand the difficulty when fisheries decline, and our job is to conserve the fishery so that it can regrow in abundance and be available for those that depend on it.
And that's all the time we have.